In 1992, Dan Reeves was fired as the head coach of the Broncos, as the team lost 3 Super Bowls under his guidance and sat third in the AFC West. But just 5 years later, this team of chokers would win back-to-back Super Bowls, led by a genius manager who literally built a framework for the modern game. But how on earth was this possible? This is the story of how a team of chokers turned into a dynasty. In the mid-'80s, the Broncos had a lot of reasons to be hopeful for the future. They had acquired quarterback John Elway in 1983, who would become the undisputed top gun of Denver. In his first few seasons, he showcased his rocket arm and an uncanny ability to make inconceivable throws. And because of his growing maturity, his teammates and coaches trusted him to eventually lead them to a Super Bowl. But despite his regular season brilliance, Elway had yet to prove he could win when it mattered most. So in 1986, it was his turn to show the world what he could do, which would be on full display in Week 9 against the Raiders. It was a tough match against their fierce rivals, but because Elway's O-line provided near-perfect protection, Elway dismantled the Raiders' defense. Denver swept the Raiders with a 21-10 victory. They jumped to an 8-1 record and looked like legitimate championship contenders. But as the drive to their ultimate dream picked up speed, an unexpected bump in the road was waiting. Week 10 was a shocking 9-3 loss to San Diego. The team did steady the ship against Kansas City thanks to the special teams. But with 5 games left, the team began making wrong turns. In Week 12, they suffered a heartbreaking last-second loss to the Giants. To make matters worse, they were crushed 37-10 by the Chiefs when they had a chance to lock up the division. They still needed one more win to technically secure the AFC West title, so Elway stepped up to rally them against the Redskins. It was a narrow 31-30 victory against a solid team, a win that should have boosted their morale heading into the playoffs. But all this promise proved to be surprisingly short-lived. They ended the regular season getting completely humiliated by Kurt Warner, no not that one, the running back, on national television. Did this fractured team even have what it took to survive a single game in the playoffs? But the Broncos' disappointments were only just getting started. In the divisional playoff game against the New England Patriots, Denver learned just how cruel football can be. Early on, Elway electrified the stadium with his legs. But just prior to halftime, disaster struck when Elway suffered a severely sprained ankle. Because of this, the Patriots stormed back to take a 17-13 lead, and it seemed like Denver's season was dead. The Broncos had to muster up a miracle to avoid elimination, and in this case, their miracle was Elway himself. Despite being in pain and robbed of his mobility, Elway was able to unleash one final piece of magic. The team was fueled by a deafening mile-high crowd, and the defense sealed a 22-17 victory. It was Denver's first playoff win in 9 years. The fog of doubt had finally lifted, but the ultimate test still lay ahead. The final obstacle between the Broncos and their Super Bowl dream was a trip to Cleveland's hostile stadium for the AFC Championship game. The Browns fans had turned the stadium into a terrifying dog pound, raining down literal dog bones. The atmosphere was completely suffocating. But this time, it was Denver's defense who answered the bell. They recorded interceptions by Ricky Hundley and Jim Ryan. But despite 3.5 quarters of defensive brilliance, the game remained a deadlocked 13-13 dogfight heading into the final minutes. And the '86 season seemed to end in bitter disappointment. Cleveland ripped the heart out of Denver by scoring a late touchdown to take a commanding 22-13 lead. Denver's Super Bowl hopes seemed completely shattered, and just when it couldn't get any worse, the ensuing kickoff was pinned all the way back at Denver's own 2-yard line. Those watching had to wonder if there was even a single play in a playbook designed for a 98-yard field. But John Elway understood the magnitude of this moment. He stepped up to the huddle and assured his team they were going to make something happen. He entered a legendary untouchable zone as he began systematically carving up the Browns' defense. Marty Schottenheimer's defense could only watch as Elway drove Denver all the way to the Cleveland 5-yard line with 42 seconds left. But could Elway deliver the fatal blow against the clock? Well, on 3rd and 1 with just 42 seconds remaining, Elway made a statement. He fired a rocket through the cold air to Mark Jackson in the end zone. The Broncos completed a miraculous 98-yard play march against all odds. This historic battle was sent into sudden death overtime. Elway continued his magic in OT, quickly orchestrating another drive. And with 6 months of agonizing work on the line, kicker Rich Karlis stepped up for a 32-yard field goal. The ball sailed through the uprights, and Denver erupted into pure euphoria. The Broncos had electrified the NFL with one of the greatest championship chases in history. The Broncos entered the Super Bowl riding that high and hoping they would win. The only problem? Bill Parcells' New York Giants arrived knowing they would, because the Giants had spent the entire year bullying and dominating opponents. And while John Elway stole the spotlight early on, the ferocious Giant defense began ruthlessly pounding on Denver's golden boy. And if there's one play which shattered Denver's momentum, it was this one. With the Broncos clinging to their lead, the Giants' defensive front completely overwhelmed Denver's O-line and trapped Elway in his own end zone. It was a crucial safety which marked the official demise of the Broncos' offense. Meanwhile, the game MVP Phil Simms put on a historic performance that systematically picked the Denver defense apart. As the game ended, Denver was left to watch the confetti fall for someone else. Their ultimate dream of a world championship would have to wait. The road back to the Super Bowl began with some great news. In the offseason, John Elway signed a new contract with the Broncos, becoming the highest-paid player in the league. And in Week 1 against the Seahawks, he was set out to prove that he was the best player on the planet. John Elway was able to spearhead 5 consecutive scoring possessions, including a career-long 72-yard bomb to Steve Sewell. It was a 23-point blowout which proved Denver wasn't ready to concede the AFC West. Expectations were sky-high heading into a Week 2 matchup against the lowly Packers. But when the torrential rains came, the Broncos' bright outlook was washed away. 6 costly turnovers paved the way for a miserable overtime tie. It was a result which felt like a complete humiliation. But just when things couldn't possibly get any weirder, an NFL players' strike became a reality. Because of this, the Broncos had to assemble a squad of replacement players that looked completely lost. The Houston Oilers dominated them, winning 40-10. All signs were pointing towards more misery in Week 3. But a startling turnaround occurred the next week. An H-back worker named Joe Dudek stepped onto the field and dominated the running game. He helped Denver record 2 wins over the Raiders and Chiefs. But when the strike was tentatively settled, the Bronco regulars would have to show up under the dome in Minnesota, and the rustiness proved to be costly. The game quickly turned disastrous when star playmaker Gerald Wilhite broke his foot en route to the end zone. It was an injury which sidelined him for the season, but the real issue was on defense. The Broncos were breaking in a wave of younger, aggressive, but highly inexperienced players, and because of this, Minnesota systematically laid waste to them. It was a 34-17 blowout. At this point, Denver's defensive identity was suddenly facing a massive existential crisis. Did this young unit even have the leadership required to stabilize a championship run? Fortunately, Denver had defensive coordinator Joe Collier. Collier was the absolute genius behind the legendary 1977 Orange Crush defense. So in Week 8, he made some key adjustments to his specialized 3-4 scheme. Now it perfectly fit his undersized but lightning-fast personnel. It was a master plan. The Broncos happily recorded their first shutout in over 3 years, but maintaining that defensive discipline was easier said than done. All that momentum came to a grinding halt against Buffalo. It was a performance where Denver hardly resembled a Super Bowl team. The Broncos played with zero enthusiasm, as their record dropped to a fragile 4-3-1. But rather than letting the season slip away, the team called an emergency meeting the very next day. It was a meeting that would completely alter the trajectory of their year. Their plan? To stop being nice and become far more aggressive. But they would have to prove their mettle against the powerhouse Chicago Bears. And after going down 14 points, it looked like nothing had changed. But in the second half of the game, everything changed. Denver's newly discovered grit allowed them to come back, taking a 31-29 lead. And with the game on the line, Denver's defense came up massive. Defensive end Rulon Jones let his emotions run wild. The Bears were completely suffocated, and the Broncos were officially back in the playoff hunt. And fortunately, the momentum instantly carried over into Los Angeles. The defensive line unleashed a ferocious pass rush that slammed Raider QB Mark Wilson 6 times. But just as the defense was finding form, John Elway decided to go into another dimension. In Week 12, he torched San Diego for 347 yards and 3 touchdowns. All these wins kept Denver within a half game of first place. But what was the secret weapon fueling his late-season onslaught? Well, in December, we saw the rise of a legendary trio of young wide receivers known as the Three Amigos: Mark Jackson, Vance Johnson, and Ricky Nattiel. And here's the thing, they all shared remarkably similar playstyles and had dynamic chemistry. So even if the team was down 14 points, the offense could still find a way back into the game, which is exactly what happened in Week 13 against the Patriots. Elway had weapons at his disposal, and after 5 years in the NFL, he had evolved into the most dangerous, versatile weapon in football history. And there was a lot more to his game than just arm strength. He possessed an unearthly ability to improvise, zigzagging wildly across the field like Houdini to turn broken plays into explosive touchdowns. One question, though, still remained. Was Elway truly ready to carry the mental weight of a primary leader? Because the AFC West was closely contested and Denver needed to lock in for the remaining 2 games of the season. Denver still needed to win their last game to lock up the AFC West division title, and the out-of-form Broncos had to battle the Chargers in a brutal winter storm at Mile High Stadium. The game became a gritty test of survival, but this severe weather brought out the absolute best in the Broncos defense. Ricky Hundley intercepted a pass and rumbled 52 yards for a touchdown. This defensive play sealed the win and secured home field advantage throughout the playoffs. It was a season plagued by injuries, distractions, and a player strike, but the Broncos entered the playoffs with the best record in the conference. Coach Dan Reeves had now led the team to 4 division titles in 5 years. Beneath that terrifyingly demanding exterior lay a deeply loyal mentor who genuinely supported his men through their roughest stretches. But would his intensely demanding style push the Broncos to greatness or fracture them under playoff pressure? Well, in the divisional playoff match against the Oilers, that didn't seem to be the case. Denver easily cruised to a commanding 21-point halftime lead. The victory seemed securely locked up, but then something happened which threatened to destroy Denver's Super Bowl dreams. Houston linebacker John Grimsley launched a vicious late hit that knocked Vance Johnson entirely out of the game. Johnson was the head honcho of the Three Amigos, so this was a big blow, but instead of being down about it, a furious fire was lit under the Broncos. It was a dominant and satisfying victory, but with their star receiver knocked out, were they truly ready to face a team entirely fueled by a year's worth of burning revenge? The AFC Championship match was against the Browns. For 365 days, the agonizing memory of Denver's 98-yard march had haunted them, and because the Browns arrived at Mile High with so much motivation, the rematch instantly escalated into a showdown for the ages. Every single play felt like an absolute war. But once again, Elway proved why he was a pocket magician. He broke free from a fierce pass rush, firing a signature rocket downfield to set up a touchdown dive at the goal line. The Broncos beat the Browns 38-33 and were AFC champions once again. But the question remained, with the finish line right in their sights, could they finally finish the job this time around? And early on, the season's MVP didn't disappoint. On Denver's very first play from scrimmage, Elway unleashed a 56-yard rocket to Ricky Nattiel for the quickest touchdown in Super Bowl history. But just as Bronco fans began tasting a world championship, the momentum completely vanished. Instead, the second quarter of the Super Bowl turned into the most destructive quarter in NFL postseason history. Washington quarterback Doug Williams suddenly caught fire, picking the injured Denver secondary apart with historic big plays. Washington exploded for an unbelievable 35 unanswered points in a single quarter. Final score, Denver 10, Washington 42. Another Super Bowl loss. So for the second consecutive year, Elway was forced to watch an opposing quarterback lift the MVP trophy. Fans had to wonder how many more years of agonizing failure would it take before the Chokers finally learned how to win it all. Unfortunately, Denver were unaware of the twists and turns waiting for them on the road ahead. In 1989, the Broncos failed to even make the playoffs. For Elway, it was a down year after his MVP win, throwing more interceptions than touchdowns, and the defense was even more lackluster and was ranked 28th against the run. Because of this, defensive coordinator Joe Collier was fired heading into '89. At this point, nobody considered the Broncos to be a Super Bowl favorite anymore. But head coach Dan Reeves knew exactly what to fix heading forwards. The premier acquisition was Steve Atwater in the first round of the draft. Atwater was a hard-hitting free safety, standing 6'3" and weighing around 220 pounds. But the true catalyst for Denver's transformation was new defensive coordinator Wade Phillips. Phillips unlocked the defense by shifting the entire team philosophy. Instead of read and react, it was react and attack. So by season's end, this terrifying unit allowed the fewest points in the entire NFL. The trenches were finally secured. But what about Elway? What happens when the franchise's biggest superstar has the statistically worst year of his career? Elway was able to improve from the previous season, but the star of the show was running back Bobby Humphrey. The rookie running back rushed for over 1,000 yards. Humphrey gave the Broncos a set of explosive legs that were just as powerful as Elway's right arm. So finally, Denver was no longer a one-man show on offense. Heading into the playoffs, they were the 8th-ranked offense, but the league's best on defense. If there was ever a time to win the Super Bowl, it would be now. Denver conquered the AFC yet again, punching their ticket to another Super Bowl. But could this newly armored squad survive the ultimate juggernaut waiting for them? Denver was great, but the 49ers were one of the greatest teams of all time. They were capable of beating any squad from any era, and unfortunately, they ruthlessly dismantled the Broncos. It felt like a loss designed to break a franchise's heart. How do you come back from 3 Super Bowl losses? Then, in 1992, Dan Reeves was finally fired after failing to deliver a Super Bowl to Denver. It felt like the end of an era. The team was ranked 22nd on offense and 19th on defense. Their chance to win the big one seemed to be over. Or was it? In 1995, the Broncos hired Mike Shanahan, offensive coordinator for the brilliant 49ers. Shanahan brought an immediate aura of championship experience to a franchise looking to rebuild its identity, but he inherited a roster in limbo. They desperately needed to bridge the gap between fading veterans and unproven young stars. But Shanahan came prepared. He armed the team with a completely overhauled offensive philosophy. At this point, though, John Elway was 35, and many believed he was past his best. But Shanahan's system completely revitalized the veteran. But the real secret to his revival was the arrival of all-pro tackle Gary Zimmerman. Elway pretty much had all day to carve up opposing secondaries. An offensive revolution would soon take place in Denver. But the real catalyst would be a late-round rookie nobody saw coming. Tight end Shannon Sharpe was smoking opponents with a team-high 63 catches. But the true balance of Shanahan's blueprint relied on a 6th-round draft choice named Terrell Davis. Low-round draft picks rarely make a dramatic impact in their first year, so nobody expected him to be a franchise savior. But Davis instantly caught his coach's eye. By season's end, he amassed 1,484 total yards. He became the lowest drafted player in NFL history to rush for 1,000 yards as a rookie. They had the quarterback, the system, and the running back. Now they just needed to stop being chokers. And in 1997, an avalanche was coming. The Broncos changed their classic uniforms for a modern, sleek redesign. And beneath the aesthetic makeover lay a brutal, physical identity ready to shock the football world. But could a team driven by past failure finally push past their playoff demons? Mike Shanahan made sure it would happen. He demanded a championship standard, pushing the team through a brutal training camp. Effort and expectations were at an all-time high. But could a 15-year veteran with a torn bicep still carry a franchise on his back? Well, for the season opener against the Kansas City Chiefs, Elway miraculously returned to the field, and the offense exploded. But the defense was just as good, fueled by newly acquired Neil Smith. It was a dominant 19-3 victory. Denver then went on a tear. They weaponized every part of their arsenal to win their next 5 games. Terrell Davis gave the offense a historic ground game, and special teams star Darian Gordon blew games open with legendary punt returns. Denver looked unstoppable. But Week 6 would truly show how good they were. Up next was a game against the Patriots, defending AFC champions. Everyone expected a great game from Monday Night Football. Instead, the Broncos absolutely destroyed them 34-13. There was no doubt they were the best team in the NFL. But what happens when an unstoppable force finally hits a wall of adversity? In Week 8, the undefeated Broncos finally lost to the Raiders. To make matters worse, the team faced an even bigger challenge. A massive blizzard stranded them in Denver before a road game against Buffalo. Because of this, players had to resort to tractors and snowmobiles just to reach the team charter. They didn't arrive until 1 a.m. on game day. And in the end, they survived a grueling overtime thriller against the Bills. But what did this win cost? Because the late season toll eventually caught up to them. They dropped pivotal road games to Kansas City and Pittsburgh, and lost Davis to a separated shoulder against San Francisco. This was costly to say the least. Denver fumbled the division title. This was a deflated wildcard team forced to survive the cutthroat playoffs. Their path to the Super Bowl would require winning entirely on the road, but fate gave them an immediate shot at redemption. It locked them into a home wildcard game against Jacksonville, the very team that had humiliated them the previous year. Because of this, the Broncos played with a terrifying level of intensity. It was a 42-7 blowout, officially launching Denver's revenge tour. But could they carry this momentum into one of the loudest environments in football? Denver marched into Kansas City, knowing they would face nothing but a hostile wall of red. The Chiefs led in the fourth quarter by just 3 points. Nonetheless, the pressure shifted entirely onto the old man Elway's shoulders. Elway, though, rose to the occasion. He responded with a legendary drive, converting a crucial 3rd down, and who else but Terrell Davis to punch in the game-winning touchdown. In the final seconds, the Denver defense stood tall on a dramatic 4th and goal, knocking down the final pass to secure a historic 14-10 upset. It was quickly becoming clear that Denver were no longer the choke artists of the past. But to get to the Super Bowl, they would have to conquer the final boss on the road, the physical Pittsburgh Steelers. Many doubted this wildcard team, already battered by a grueling road schedule. But the Broncos didn't just survive this physical onslaught, they matched it blow for blow. Terrell Davis set an aggressive tone early, as Denver proved they would not be bullied. And Elway himself was able to withstand the hostile environment that had swallowed up so many previous Super Bowl hopefuls. He iced the game with a legendary third down strike to Shannon Sharpe. It was a 24-21 victory, a testament to total execution. The wildcard Broncos were headed to the Super Bowl, but honestly they were still heavy underdogs against the defending world champions, the Green Bay Packers. But perhaps being underdogs relieved the pressure a little bit. This wasn't a story about choking, it was a story of overcoming the odds. Because here's the thing, the NFC had won 13 consecutive Super Bowls, routinely humiliating AFC representatives. Critics believed history would inevitably repeat itself, but the Broncos refused to follow the old script, leaning on raw, smash-mouth football to physically overpower the champions. But after taking a 24-17 lead, it was déjà vu for Elway. He threw a critical fourth-quarter interception that allowed Brett Favre to tie the game. Many wondered if the Broncos would choke yet another Super Bowl. If he lost this game, there would be no doubt that he would retire as the biggest choker in NFL history. So, in the most critical drive of his career, Elway answered the call before Davis punched in the go-ahead touchdown. Denver had done it. The agonizing 14-year dry spell was broken. For Elway, he had completed one of the greatest stories in NFL history. But it wasn't just Elway. The team will go down as one of the greatest to ever play the sport. It was Elway, Davis, Sharpe, and that incredible O-line. And the defense was one of the league's best. So, to nobody's surprise, the team were able to go back-to-back the following year. From constantly choking on the biggest stage, to now cementing themselves as one of the best teams of all time. Shanahan's Broncos took the NFL by storm in the late 90s. Where do you think they rank in terms of teams of that decade? Let me know in the comments.